Amazingly, it matched to 3 cartridges, numbers 244, 240, and 175, all from different places on the battlefield.
Here it is. This is the spot that we've picked up cartridge 175. This is an Army cartridge we found on this spot, and this is the only gun in the collections here that it matched. And
so that gun
was right here on this spot, June 25th of June.
Yeah.
Trooper could have been here and pointing at a warrior that direction, or up on the hill here, or spinning around firing in that direction, firing at the ridge stop out here where we know there were many warriors trying to protect himself until he was struck down. And it's had a lot of use since then, I can see that, and been repaired and fixed, and probably was captured, may have been used against Custer elsewhere. Really rather exciting moment. We knew we had a tool that would allow us to do something no one had ever done before with a battlefield.
That tool would reveal how tactics, and especially weapons, played a decisive role in this battle. But what about the men who fired those guns? Vincent Charlie was an ordinary trooper. He was mutilated and left to die. Now forensic science is revealing his face.
I sometimes think about them and their families and how they must have suffered and what might really have taken place. But they were people, they were somebody's sons, possibly somebody's fathers, you know, they were real people.
What do we really know about the troopers of the 7th Cavalry? Were they really the crack troopers of legend?
We know the soldiers from the enlistment records are average height of 5'7", average age of 22 years old, average weight of 150 pounds. Some of the ones that we found are much younger in age, 16, 17 years of age. They weren't supposed to be in the Army at that time.
We know that half of them were immigrants, mostly from Ireland, England, Germany, mostly from Western Europe. Most of them were doubtlessly from poor backgrounds.
These were poor immigrants, but they had joined the legendary 7th Cavalry. They should have been well trained and fighting fit, but the troopers' bones tell a very different story.
Here are teeth, and these black tarry stains suggest tobacco use, particularly as in the form of pipe tobacco. He lived a tough life, little oral hygiene, bad diet, and in that way he's probably very typical of most of the troopers. There's a tooth here that's missing a crown. It's rotted away.
We also see that they had a very rough life. We can see that, knowing that these guys had rheumatism and arthritis at the age of 22.
So what we've got here is a vertebra, and you can see these depressions that indicate that disc was starting to deteriorate. And so as the troopers rode over the tough trails, these shock-absorbing structures would start to deteriorate, and they would end up with back problems.
The 7th Cavalry were ill-prepared and poorly fed. Now, after weeks in the saddle, how fit were Custer's troops as they rode with him into the valley of the Little Bighorn?
They were in terrible shape that morning in June. They'd ridden all night long. They'd been riding from Fort Abraham Lincoln since May. They hadn't had any rest. Their backs were hurting, their teeth were aching. They were in bad shape. It probably contributed some to the overall defeat.
Forensic evidence shows that the troopers were in poor condition for a fight. Now archaeology would reveal what actually happened as the 7th Cavalry fought to the death at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. How could a successful commander like George Armstrong Custer and a well-armed modern army be defeated by the Northern Plains Indians? Historical accounts say that as Major Reno charged the Indian village, Custer's battalion reached the ridges across the river. Custer then rode down to a valley called Medicine Tail Coulee, where he divided his troops into 2 wings. Custer rode with the left wing down to the river, threatening the Indian camp. The right wing, with Captain Miles Keogh, was deployed on higher ground. It's here that all the detective work comes together and starts to reveal what happened to the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Indian witnesses describe their first encounter with Custer's soldiers.
From across the river, I see the column of soldiers turn to the left to march down to the river where the attack was to be made. Mrs. Spotted Horn Bull, Honk Papa Lakota.
The archaeological evidence here confirms the Indian stories.
The left wing that came down the river did meet some light resistance. And there's archaeological evidence of that in this flat out here. There were cartridge cases and there were personal items that were lost and counterfire from the Indians across the river. It wasn't a heavy action, no evidence of strong intensity.
The reason for this was that most of the Indian warriors were still fighting Reno to the south. Unprotected, the Indian women and children fled north. Custer and his left wing of 80 troopers set off in pursuit of them. Meanwhile, the right wing's 120 men deploy near Calhoun Hill under the command of Captain Miles Keogh. At this stage, the fighting was sporadic and long distance. But surely the 7th Cavalry, even when outnumbered, had been trained to deal with any Indian attack. So how critical were their tactics to the outcome of this battle?
You're going to do a little tacticking for us.
Right, some skirmish lines.
Yeah. Combat can be a very stressful situation. So tactics are a very, very good way to maintain cohesion and stability among the soldiers.
Custer's cavalry tactics were laid out in a manual written in 1874. The horse got the soldier to the scene of the action. Then typically the troopers would dismount and fight on foot. The troopers formed a line, each spaced 5 yards apart. This was called a skirmish line.
3 out of the 4 in a squad would rush up to the skirmish line and prepare to fire. The horse holders would then lead the led horses back to a safe position behind the lines. The skirmish line could fire either on command or at will.
The skirmish line was a response to the increasing accuracy of firearms. It was safer to spread men out to avoid massing as easy targets. Was there any evidence of these deployments on the battlefield?
To find a skirmish line, we should expect to find cartridge cases from individual guns distributed at roughly 5-yard intervals.
At Calhoun Hill, there were cartridge cases indicating the right-wing skirmish line.
The skirmish line is represented by the flags, and each one of these flags is the approximate location where we found a cartridge case or several cartridge cases, each from a different carbine indicating where a soldier was placed along the line.
Here, Indians, using the terrain for cover, threatened right-wing troopers exposed on their skirmish lines.
And the warriors are beginning to swarm up out of the valley from all directions, particularly from here in the south, and they gain this ridge out here, and we found excellent archaeological evidence over there of a large number of warriors who are on the other side of that ridge.
The Indian warrior needed no command or control. They fought individually as well-trained hunters.
Most of these men being professional predators all of their life against humans and animals. You didn't have to tell them when to get down, when to hide, when to charge, when to totally take advantage of someone when they're in complete panic.
The cavalry soldier was trained to fight from a distance. The Plains Indian fought up close and personal.
And everything generally had a long handle on it so that on horseback you were able to swoop down off the side of your horse and hit men that were disabled under the ground. So they would try to knock their weapon hand out and break their wrist with one blow and then just backhand them across the forehead or on the temple like that.